While NASA kept insisting that its legacy systems were on schedule and mission-ready, SpaceX was already landing orbital-class boosters, pushing engine cycles the old guard called impossible, and proving, again, that engineering reality doesn't care about PowerPoints, committees, or billion-dollar excuses. And here's the part they really don't want you to hear. While the private company was testing, exploding, learning, and succeeding, the agency quietly admitted, behind closed doors, that its own chosen systems were too risky, too slow, and too fragile to meet the very timelines it was publicly promising. How much do you think they lost before they finally said it out loud? More importantly, who knew, and when? They told you the lunar lander program was under control, and they insisted the propulsion systems were mature. They told you their timeline was realistic. But while the private company was firing full-flow staged combustion engines by the dozen, the agency was burning years and billions on an architecture it quietly labeled too risky to attempt for its own 2024 deadline, yet kept defending in public. And here's the kicker. They didn't just question a few minor details, they questioned the entire integrated system, from the untested engines, to the reaction control layout, to the sequence of operations requiring multiple orbital refueling steps. They never had the infrastructure to support. They claimed the program met threshold requirements, but internally they warned, there is no schedule margin. This design threatens mission viability. Now ask yourself, if they knew that, why did they keep selling the schedule? But hold that thought, because the real shock comes later, when you see who tried to stop them and got ignored. The more you dig into the agency's internal review, the more the pattern of institutional failure appears. Overpromised timelines, under-delivered hardware, and decision-making shaped more by political optics than engineering constraints. The documented findings confirm the use of untested propulsion architecture, multiple high-risk refueling operations, structural uncertainties, and a complete lack of margin for unexpected delay, showing a shocking conflict between public messaging and internal assessments. And here's your first unpredictable reveal. Timed just when you think you understand the scale of the issue. They almost caught the failure in 2020. One internal reviewer flagged the entire schedule as untenable unless major milestones are achieved at unprecedented speed. But what happened to that warning? It was quietly filed away, not rejected, just completely ignored. This wasn't a failure of engineering talent. It was a failure of the bureaucracy itself, proving that the old system protects the process, not the product. While the private company treated every explosion as a free lesson and immediately iterated, the government's approach was to pretend the problems didn't exist to protect the illusion of progress. This institutional paralysis led directly to the agency operating on an architecture fundamentally dependent on sequential success, weaving dozens of no-fail steps into the mission's fabric. Contrast that with the private company, which was landing boosters, reusing hardware, iterating engines, and flying so frequently that redesign cycles happened faster than the agency's paperwork approvals. They wasted years arguing about PowerPoint slides while the innovator was building an entirely new space economy. The financial cost of this arrogance is staggering. While the government's flagship heavy-lift rocket, the SLS, was burning through $4.1 billion per launch, the private company was routinely executing tests at a fraction of that cost, with a per-launch cost target orders of magnitude lower. Your tax dollars paid $4.1 billion for a single flight of a non-reusable vehicle, even while the innovator was demonstrating orbital-class reusability as a standard practice. This massive cost gap proves the financial model of the old guard is fundamentally broken, rewarding spending instead of results. The government rocket wasn't designed to fly often, it wasn't designed to be affordable, and it certainly wasn't designed to be competitive. It was simply designed to be funded. The culture of waste became clearer when a propulsion specialist suggested a contingency approach that would reduce risk by simplifying the complex refueling logic. This common-sense, safety-driven idea reached mid-level management, but it never reached the final decision table. It was dismissed because acknowledging the need for simplification would expose the fragility of the entire primary plan, a plan that was already locked in by billions in sunk costs. The system was more concerned with justifying past expenditures than with achieving future success. The innovator, meanwhile, was achieving landing precision the legacy systems still described as theoretical, while the agency was still working with propulsion systems that had no validated model for the low-pressure lunar descent conditions. Translation: the agency didn't even know if its critical thruster configuration would fire correctly on the moon. And here's a near miss they'll never advertise, right on the edge of catastrophe, a moment of hidden panic. A subsystem integration test failed on a software simulation. If that failure had occurred during a live burn, the entire lander concept would have been weeks from public embarrassment. Instead, the simulation was simply reset, a new parameter was introduced, and the failure mode quietly disappeared from the report narrative. Not fixed, not eliminated, just quietly excluded. This cover-up protected the timeline, but it locked in the technical risk. This systemic arrogance is why Elon Musk called this out years ago. The culture protects the process, not the truth. They needed the program to look functional, so funding wouldn't be questioned. The agency spent years defending a launch schedule that, according to its own internal analysis, could never be met, leading to an unavoidable developmental delay that shattered its 2024 Artemis objective. While they wasted half a decade arguing about PowerPoint slides, the innovator developed an entire launch system, including 2 coastal launch complexes. In the time it took the agency to complete a single major modification order on its own infrastructure. This is the difference between a system built for speed and a system built for delay. The technical superiority of the private company came from a willingness to break hardware and learn, a necessary step that the cautious, cost-plus approach of the government system refused to take. The lack of decisive progress in the American institutional system created a gaping opportunity for rivals, and China stepped forward, aiming to match the private sector's reusability. They promised that the launch of the Zhuge 3 would be their Falcon 9 moment, proof that their new era of spaceflight had arrived. But reality punished them just as it punishes institutional failure everywhere. After all the hype, the rocket slammed into the ground in a fireball the media politely called a hard landing. The crucial detail they tried to bury is that the rocket didn't miss the landing zone by 100 meters, it missed by just meters, with burn marks visible right outside the landing circle. This proves the financial model of the old guard is fundamentally broken, rewarding spending instead of results. The agency's inability to adapt and fix root problems caused cascading delays and exposed major schedule risks, forcing oversight committees to demand answers and launch schedules to be redrawn from scratch. The agency lost its schedule credibility. Worse still, because of this institutional failure, international competitors, yes, including China, accelerated their lunar programs, targeting 2030, while the US system was still debating paperwork. This created a strategic vulnerability that should anger every taxpayer. Our loss of leadership is their gain. The humiliation deepened with the legacy crew capsule, the Boeing Starliner, which suffered over 1,000 software defects, including navigation bugs that could have stranded astronauts in orbit. These warnings were delivered in writing, reviewed, and then quietly minimized. One whistleblower later exposed the truth. If just one engineer had been listened to, this entire disaster could have been avoided. While the troubled vehicle faced these cascading failures, the private company achieved a high reliability record, with its booster becoming the most launched orbital rocket in the world by a large margin. The Legacy Crew capsule was supposed to launch astronauts in 2017, yet after 20 years and more than $5 billion in direct funding, it still wasn't safe for human flight. Engineers begged leadership to slow down and fix the defects, but they were overruled because the program was too politically connected to cancel. The sheer scale of the financial hole is almost unbelievable. Independent auditors calculated that the government's heavy lift program would consume over $93 billion by the early 2030s. Meanwhile, the private stainless steel system, including its fully reusable boosters, ships, engines, and 2 coastal launch pads, cost around $5 billion total. That's a 20-fold difference for a rocket designed to be 100 times cheaper per flight. Your tax dollars funded a $93 billion bureaucracy, while the actual innovative solution was delivered for $5 billion. This is the undeniable vindication of the private sector. Their superiority is measured not just in technical success, but in financial honesty. The culture of protecting contracts over progress is deep. Internal documents revealed that the propulsion complexity was acknowledged before key public statements were made. They knew the lander required sequential perfection. They knew the fueling chain introduced unprecedented cumulative risk. And they knew the integrated system had no margin for error. And yet publicly, on track, within scope, ambitious but achievable. Your tax dollars paid for those false statements, funding a program the agency privately admitted could not meet the deadline. Now look back to the state-backed rival in Asia. The failure of their booster, the Juke-3, exposed a system that rushed its landing profile, leaping from suborbital hops, where it achieved an accuracy of 1.7 to 2.4 meters, straight to a full orbital descent with a difficult 3-engine landing burn. The private company didn't make that jump until after dozens of soft returns and controlled descents. The rival went straight to the hardest mode because, unlike the private sector where failure means fix it or die, in a government-driven program, failure means explain it in a meeting. The consequence of this institutional failure was that the agency's Inspector General formally warned Congress, "We are at risk of losing the lunar leadership position." The agency's own oversight body had to confirm the painful reality. The American system was failing to keep pace with rivals in Asia who were achieving a new methane booster, a reusable experimental hopper, and an aggressive lunar timeline aiming for 2030. This is the ultimate tribal validation. Their side is losing, and you knew the truth all along. The institutional obsession with secrecy stands in stark contrast to the private company's immediate and public acknowledgement of its own setbacks. The innovator understood that reusability requires hundreds of data points, endless failures, and the willingness to be embarrassed publicly. The rival tried to skip those steps, tried to leapfrog the pain, and tried to take a shortcut, and reality crushed them for it, exposing an 8-year competitive gap. While the Asian startup was crashing their booster, the leading U.S. private company performed a booster landing on a drone ship, a booster return to the launch site, a reused booster's 20-second flight, and a fully stacked methane-based Super Heavy test, all within the same quarter. This is the difference between a program that measures time in weeks of iteration and a system that measures time in years of bureaucracy. The Legacy Crew capsule was mired in delays, leaks, and misfiring thrusters, consuming over $5 billion. Yet when engineers begged leadership to fix the defects, they were overruled. That money, that $5 billion, was sunk into an outdated system designed by legacy contractors who had become dependent on government spending, not on delivering results. The cost of incompetence is measured not in dollars, but in lost decades. The original price tag for the government super rocket was a few billion, then 10, then 23, and after 13 years, it still costs $4.1 billion per launch. The most crucial cost lesson is this: the heavy lift rocket wasn't designed to fly often, it wasn't designed to be affordable, and it certainly wasn't designed to be competitive. It was simply designed to be funded. Your tax dollars are the fuel for a machine whose sole purpose is to consume, regardless of the output. The core technical difference is that the private company treats every failure as data, and every success as the starting point for the next upgrade. The institutional approach, by contrast, tried to fix its unworkable lunar design by introducing new parameters into the failed simulation and quietly excluding the failure mode from the report. One program creates mastery, built through iteration, while the other creates fragility, built only for appearances. The superiority isn't just in the cost of the rocket, it's in the readiness of the crew vehicle too. The legacy crew capsule suffered over 1,000 software defects, including navigation bugs that could have stranded astronauts in orbit. The rival government in Asia's failure to stick the landing, missing the pad by mere meters, exposed that precision is only half of reusability. The other half is survivability. They nailed trajectory, but they failed physics, unable to handle the complexities of stable engine throttling, clean combustion, propellant behavior during final seconds, and leg stability under load. Their suborbital landings were actually more accurate than their orbital one, proving that their failure wasn't guidance, but fundamental energy management at the most critical moment. The government program ignored critical tank farm warnings at Cape Canaveral because redesigning the ground systems was too expensive, months wasted on protecting a budget. Meanwhile, the private company built an entire, complete dual-pad, high-capacity launch site with 16,500 tons of liquid oxygen storage and 5,000 tons of methane storage for a total private investment of about $1.8 billion. One manager quietly admitted off-record, "We cannot compete with that." The ability to build major infrastructure for $1.8 billion while the agency was still arguing about tank farm upgrades for a $4.1 billion per launch rocket is the clearest possible vindication. The pattern of institutional failure is now complete. They ignored a warning in 2020 that the schedule was untenable. They ignored a specialist's suggestion to reduce risk in refueling, and an engineer begged leadership to halt a major schedule milestone, only to be refused because progress must continue, locking in the failure. This systemic arrogance proved that institutional failure appears as arrogance, never just an honest mistake. Now we begin the rapid-fire cluster, the full exposure, where the truth becomes impossible to ignore. The agency spent billions defending a schedule it internally labeled non-viable. Money was allocated, spent, and committed, all for a timeline designed to impress optics, not to achieve engineering reality. Every delay multiplied cost, and every cost multiplied political pressure, but not a single major milestone meaningfully reduced the risk profile. While this unbelievable waste unfolded, the private company was demonstrating the power of rapid launch cadence. Dozens of launches per year, then nearly one per week, then multiple in single weeks, achieving one of the highest reliability records ever. The hidden admission confirms the betrayal. Internal documents revealed that the propulsion complexity was acknowledged before key public statements were made. They knew the lander required sequential perfection. They knew the fueling chain introduced unprecedented cumulative risk, and they knew the integrated system had no margin for error. And yet, publicly, on track, within scope, ambitious but achievable. Your tax dollars paid for those false statements, funding a program that the agency privately admitted could not meet the deadline. This leads to the ultimate competitive humiliation. While the agency spent billions and missed deadlines, the private company landed boosters, reused hardware, improved engines, built infrastructure, and reduced cost per launch to a fraction of legacy contractors. The agency's per-launch architecture remains squarely in the billions. The competitor achieved real progress while the agency debated paperwork. The pivot is complete. The new moon race runs on engineering, not on political deadlines. The state-backed rival in Asia is still chasing the reusability crown, and their failure shows the fundamental gap. The private company says, "Fail fast, fix fast," while their rival says, "Fail fast, pretend it didn't happen." They tried to hide how close the miss was by using vague terms like close and tantalizingly close, rather than admitting the booster missed by 3 meters. Admitting the number would force the question, so why didn't it land? And the answer would expose their unstable landing burn. The Asian startup suffered a major setback when their booster broke apart in mid-air, unintentionally, because the engine failed, even though the startup called it a controlled termination. Analysts froze the footage. You could see the engine choke, the fire erupt upward, and the structural breakup. They were seconds from success and seconds from avoiding disaster. They failed in 2025 for the exact same reason the leading U.S. private company solved engine relight reliability in 2017. An 8-year engineering gap was exposed in a single fireball. The consequences are clear. Because of the wasted resources and the inability to adapt, competitors accelerated their lunar programs, and China now targets 2030, building, copying, learning, and iterating to surpass us. They look at the private company's methods and see the future. They look at the agency's old architecture and see opportunity. Our loss is their gain. The consequences are not just financial, they are strategic, risking America's long-term leadership in space. The Legacy Crew capsule was mired in delays, leaks, and misfiring thrusters, consuming over $5 billion. Yet when engineers begged leadership to fix the defects, they were overruled. That money, that $5 billion, was sunk into an outdated system designed by legacy contractors who had become dependent on government spending, not on delivering results. The Legacy Crew capsule saw contract reductions, and the government rocket faced scathing reports that exposed the cost overruns. The government rocket program would consume over $93 billion by the early 2030s, yet the consequences delivered were simply a redrawing of the launch schedule, leaving the broken process itself untouched. The final lesson is the simplest one. Reality always wins. Good engineering always wins. Iterative testing always wins. And bureaucracy always loses. The agency defended an architecture it knew was too risky. It ignored the warnings, it rejected the audits, and it buried the failures, wasting years and billions chasing a deadline that its own analysis said could not be met. Meanwhile, the private company mocked, doubted, dismissed, proved the critics wrong in real time. They landed rockets, they reused boosters, they scaled production, and they cut costs. They changed what possible means in rocketry. But here is the unresolved truth that should keep every viewer awake. The same broken decision-making system is still in place. The same processes that buried the warnings, the same delays, the same political pressures, the same legacy mindset that put image over reality. Your money is still feeding it. Your timeline is still slipping because of it. Your competitive edge is still threatened by it. The agency continues operating systems shaped more by politics than engineering, more by committees than test stands, more by optics than physics. They haven't fixed the root problem. They've just rebranded it. The next chapter of the space race won't be won by the biggest budget or the loudest promises. It will be won by whoever listens to reality the fastest. And history shows that reality favors the engineers who learn from their mistakes, not the ones who pretend they never happened. This wasn't an accident. This was the system working exactly as it always has, and failing exactly as it always does. And unless someone breaks the cycle, unless someone asks the questions they don't want asked, unless someone exposes the decisions they hope stay buried, we will watch this failure repeat again and again and again. Because the real threat isn't the wasted money, it's the fact that they're still doing it, and your money is still paying for it today.